Hi guys, here I am, not awkward at all. So get your notes out that go with our Islamic empires chapter. You're going to follow along as I go over this stuff with you. And also know that after this, I will be posting a short assignment that follows up with some of our bigger connecting questions that are only found in this lecture, not in the notes. Somewhat hinted to in the chapter readings, but this way I know that you are paying attention, but more importantly, that we're making these connections within this unit and kind of bridging a gap to future units as well. All right, so look for that. But for now, brief intro. So we're studying the Islamic empires, which during the early modern period will help us cover the Middle East. All of these Islamic empires are obviously ruling under Islam, so that's one of their commonalities. Another commonality between these three major Islamic empires, the Ottoman, Safavid, and the Mughal Empire, have to do with their Turkish origins. Each of the founders of these main empires have Turkish origins, so similar to the Seljuk Turks and the Ghaznavid Turks and various other Central Asian Turks that we've been studying. They all derive from this older group of people. They will go on their different paths, but this will affect their rule via intertribal Turkish politics, which will have a lot of backstabbing and intrigue, but it's also more importantly going to affect their military because they have a long history of using cavalry and access to horses, so that will give them an advantage. But we're going to start with the Ottoman Empire first, since it's in your notes first. All right, let's go. Okay, so the Ottoman Empire, as we can see on your dates, lasted for a very long time. Often students, when we review our Middle Eastern history, have a moment, a big gap, and try to figure out what the heck happened between the Mongol Empire and essentially imperialism. And the answer is the Ottoman Empire. If you're not sure what's going on in any particular time in Middle Eastern history, the answer is probably the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Turks had been creeping around for quite a while. However, with the fall of the Mongols, they were able to occupy a political vacuum. And the founder, thus, of the true Ottoman Empire is Osman Bey, pictured here. He considered himself a Ghazi, or religious warrior, a devout Muslim. It will serve as the foundation of the Ottoman Empire. He also seemed to have a really soft beard. It looks a little bit like a Yorkie puppy, don't you think? Central to Ottoman history is the use of their military. Their early adoption of gunpowder and guns will give them an advantage over other competing Islamic empires. But also the growth of the Janissary Corps, the central military elite, also gave them a very distinct advantage. However, they are a unique brand of military in that they are slaves coming mostly from Eastern Europe. As the Ottoman Empire expanded, they would often take very young boys from their conquered lands and train them to become janissaries. The janissaries, even though slaves, were eventually paid high sums, they got to carry weapons, and were very well respected. And so this ended up being a win for these boys who were taken. Although they took them from many places, the vast majority of janissaries came from the Balkan regions of Europe, including Greece and the former Yugoslavia. Note in the many images of janissaries and concubines that we will see, they're often very light-skinned, showing their Eastern European descendants. I think it's also worthwhile noting their amazing fashion sense that most likely inspired some 90s fashion trends that you might know. All joking aside, the Janissaries helped the Ottoman conquer some key lands, most notably Constantinople in 1453, fell once and for all to the Muslims under the leadership of Mehmed II. This is obviously important because Constantinople, which was now renamed Istanbul, is not only key in terms of trade, but also connecting military avenues for their expansion. Ottoman expansion into the Balkans will have long-term consequences for the region. As you can see looking at the map here, this is the site of a lot of conflict in the 20th century, often has to do with religious conflict, as now we have various forms of Christianity, some Jewish populations, as well as a Muslim presence. And these ethnic and religious divides will bubble up into the 20th century and lead to sometimes genocides, as well as other deep-seated political battles. The Ottomans, however, are not the first Muslim empire to use slaves within their government. The Abbasid Empire also showed evidence of enslaving non-Muslims and then using them in their government. They would enslave them under the practice of Devshirme, which is the enslavement of non-Muslims for the purpose of converting them. And once converted, they would hold some significant office. Most notable of this is the Mamluk troops that began to grow as the Seljuk Turks were nipping away at the Abbasid Empire. The Mamluks were the slave army of the faltering Abbasid Empire and the temporary Ottoman Empire. They were able to occupy the political vacuum left after the sack of Baghdad and rule from about 1300 through 1400 as a fairly formidable force. They continually beat the Mongols, I like to think because the Mongols just didn't feel like it, but they were noted as pretty good warriors. So as a former slave empire of the Abbasid, they did come to be an autonomous power for a period of time. So we have yet another example of powerful slave armies. A major challenge of the Ottoman Empire is how to successfully rule over such a diverse empire. If we look at this map, we'll note that not only did the Ottoman Empire rule over formerly Arab-ruled lands, but also the former Byzantine Empire of the other parts of Eastern Europe. So here we have religiously, we have Roman Catholics, we have Eastern Orthodox Christians, we have Syriac Christians in places like Egypt, we have various forms of Islam, not to mention other smaller religious groups and a small scattering of Jews as well. Ethnically, the Ottomans are Turkish, and so they are a minority in this area. And so the way that they were able to rule over such a diverse group is by devising a unique system called the Millet System, where we have a central government, but the Millet System allowed autonomy for certain key groups. So this is a pretty crude map of the millet system. First, don't mix millet up with the grain, as some students in the past have done. The millet system in this case refers to various types of autonomous powers throughout the Ottoman Empire. So Muslims were their own millet, Christian Orthodox groups were their own, Jews, Armenians, Catholics, all had their own millets, meaning their own communities that were led by usually a religious patriarch of some sort who ultimately had to report to the Sultan, the Ottoman Sultan. So here we have autonomy, but ultimately all led back to the Sultan. So as we've seen in history, often tolerance is the key to longevity for many of these empires, and here the Ottoman Empire is going for that. And so the millet systems help to keep these various minority and sometimes majority groups very happy. And so as long as they are paying key taxes and essentially swearing allegiance to the Ottoman Empire, all was good. However, if there were particular disputes between a Christian and a Muslim that didn't directly go against key laws, ultimately they would defer to Muslim law or Sharia law, which is technically the law of the Muslim empire. Over time, as things do get worse with the Ottoman Empire, we'll see that they are very bad at investing in industry. Their economy is largely agricultural, so as the tide turns and Europe grows, we'll see this will leave the Ottoman Empire in the dust. And so as things get worse, we will see that some of these ethnic groups and some of these stronger internal economies, most notably the Armenians as well as the Greeks, they will begin to rebel because the millet system isn't enough to appease them anymore. They want independence due to their sense of cultural nationalism and to get away from the sick man of Europe, the Ottoman Empire. We'll see that for some of these groups, like the Armenians, as they are so close to the territory that the Turks have owned, that's why we call it Turkey today, this will be particularly bad for them as they are so integrated with the Turkish populations that it will lead to political competition. It will lead to essentially the Armenian genocide, which we will look at in the 20th century unit. If there is any Ottoman sultan that you should know, it is definitely Suleiman the Magnificent. He reigned for a long stretch of time, and under his reign, the Ottoman Empire reached its heights. He further expanded into Europe and into the North African region. He also definitely had the best turban of all of the sultans. Suleiman the Magnificent, seen here, wanted to take advantage of the weakness of Europe at this point as they were descending into the Protestant Reformation. He sought to slowly push into Europe with his eye on the Habsburgs, shown here with his men sieging an Eastern European castle. He pushed as far into Vienna, but eventually was defeated by the Habsburgs there, and then slowly began to push back. More notable is the fact that the Ottoman Empire was able to organize a very strong navy, both a legitimate navy and piracy. Seen here is the Admiral Barbarossa, better known as Redbeard the Pirate. And so the Barbary pirates were able to take over key Mediterranean routes, and for a brief period of time, the Ottomans had clearly the best navy in the region. It should be noted that Suleiman is also the sultan who ended the very controversial practice of serial concubinage, which we will talk about more in the harem presentation. But essentially, the previous sultans did not marry so as not to share power with other key families. Instead, they simply produced heirs via, a whole slew of concubines. But it's purported that he fell in love with Roxolana, shown here, who was a concubine stolen from probably the Ukrainian region of Eastern Europe. Suleiman was also given the nickname Suleiman the Lawgiver because he reformed the laws of the Ottoman Empire, consolidated them, and was known for being pretty fair. He is so esteemed in the legal world that this is his bust that is found in Congress and a hall of other major lawgivers throughout history. Suleiman's reforms included a simplification of the legal code, so he literally combed through the previous decrees of other sultans to take out redundancies, to take any out that went specifically against this form of Sharia law. And so now we have a more uniform legal code that also covered criminal law. He also put into place a true tax code to collect more taxes. Before that, tax collection was left up to the Millet systems. And due to having a central tax code, it's probably why he was able to fund the huge navy and other military expansions, not to mention the rebuilding of more infrastructure, so that helped. Also, he extended a lot of protections to preferred peoples, or the dhimmi, if we'll remember that term. He extended particular protections to Jewish populations. He had some key Jewish emissaries and colleagues that he worked with. He had a respect for the Jewish populations. They were under attack in parts of Eastern Europe, and so that had some very strict laws, strict protections for Jewish populations, as well as Christians and other groups, but specifically Jews. Also, he expanded universal education. I shouldn't say universal. It was mostly for boys, usually attached to Muslim schools, but he saw a deeper funding of that and coded that. Some other stuff like that. So those are the essential elements of the Ottoman Empire that we are covering in the early modern period. Obviously, we still need to get into some of the gender stuff and the political stuff, which will come via the presentations. So this is sort of the height of the Ottoman Empire. We'll watch it fall in the next time period. So post any questions that you might have in the comments section under the blog. And also make sure that you do the mini assignment attached to this. It'll be a Google form, so careful that you type it in another Word document before you submit it. Okay, I'll be making another video tomorrow because I'm tired on the Safavid and Mughal empires. All right, good night, goodbye. See you.